hope you're enjoying your weekend. It's a very nice, pleasant weekend here in the northwest of Ireland, weather-wise. And I want to do this video to talk about, well, let me tell you how it started. A week or so ago, I was on a group, a witchy poo group, purporting to be about ancient paganism, and it was nothing but all Wiccans. We all know Wicca was founded in the 1950s by an English civil servant called Gerald Gardner, who liked watching people running around naked. And but that's not to say Gardner was a very interesting character too. But the Wiccan Road was originally written by Aleister Crowley. We know that, so we know why Wicca came into being. I've talked about that numerous times. There was actually a diversion away from real paganism and magic to keep the idiots out of it. And unfortunately, it hasn't worked since the arrival of social media. Now, on this group, there was a post that was started by saying, typical, the type in America who wears a mask to prove that she didn't vote for Trump, saying that she's disgusted by all the neo-Nazis and racism in paganism today. And it's how it's taken it over. Well, that's not true at all. There's very little of that going on. Yes, it does exist, of course. There's no doubt about that, particularly in Nordic paganism circles. But these are just the types who are basically not even Northern heathen pagans. They're basically Pentecostal and Lutheran Christians who just found a new way to do church. That's all they are. You'll find that nearly always that. A lot of these types. And this sort of like Nordic paganism, Viking paganism, but it's rare. The racist part is rare, because there's none of that. Anyone who's a true pagan knows none of that is mentioned in the sagas or the Eddas. None of it. Now, there's a movie coming out called The Northman. I haven't watched it yet, but from what I gather, it is actually a fairly honest portrayal of the Icelandic sagas, which are brutal. They're really comparable to things like the Sicilian mafia families at war with each other in the 900s, the 800s in Iceland and in Norway and in Ireland and other countries they were in. And it's restored some kind of balance in a very... But the director of that film says, I didn't want to feed into racism, and the Guardian newspaper tried to make out that the movie was a testament to whiteness, the usual cultural Marxist garbage. It wasn't, of course. It's a fairly honest portrayal of those sagas. Now, so that this woman's comment, I said, this is not true at all. It's hardly the case. And it says I've met very few of them. And they do exist, all right, and they're a selective minority. The majority pagans don't have anything to do with modern politics in terms of getting involved in it, because basically they understand that what he called democracy is an extension of Abrahamic thought, just like cultural Marxism and just like that other stuff is. So it was very difficult for a pagan mind to really fit into that. But I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just saying it's very difficult. I find it very difficult. That's probably because of our approach to it, because if you look at India is an incredibly successful democracy for all its faults, and that's essentially a pagan society, Hindus for the most part. So, it does work out. Now, that made me think about are there real crises facing paganism today? And there absolutely is. And they're all a result of social media. And I wouldn't even say that any kind of like white nationalism was even one of them, because it's so far down the list. I mean, I got pagan followers in the US military who sent me photographs of them like in Afghanistan and everything. And they're all like, they've all got like, the helm of awe tattoos and, the Asgid runes and everything on them, and lots of Celtic designs and stuff. And They're all got their arms around their buddies who are all black guys and Hispanic guys and Asian guys. So like, there's none of that. It's very, very rare, you know, very rare. But the crises are real. The Burkean did an article. It's an Irish magazine that basically, it's Edmund Burke, sort of like a Protestant Enlightenment, very honourable by the way the Protestant Enlightenment was. The concept driving that unfortunately was corrupted by things like the Orange Order and stuff, but in its purest sense, whether applied to either, you know, modern Catholicism or any forms of Christianity, there was a lot to be said for it. But the Burkean magazine is basically a philosophical, I think it's mostly students at Trinity who write, and they've done articles on paganism, and they've said nice things about me, and they spoke about what the crisis facing paganism is, and it really is the same one I want to talk about. They call it cat lady paganism, which is not particularly fair because there's lots of males involved in this. I would call it cosplay LARPing paganism, dress-up paganism. That's the first one. The second one is political correctness. Now, because the political correctness actually, I'll talk about that later. Let me talk about the cosplay things. Just think if pagans were alive today. If Christianity never came to Europe, and we were still pagans in our respective pagan traditions throughout, and Islam never came, throughout Europe, what would we look like and dress like? Well, we'd look and dress like this, like anyone, normal people walking around. And the proof of that is India. They don't all go around dressed like swamis, okay? They don't all go around dressed like, you know, Kali. Life has to go on. So, but you still have, that's what it would be like. But you would not be able to tell they were pagans. They would look like what they would be today if any other spiritual tradition had become dominant. And this is a huge problem in paganism today that's come directly out of Wicca, which is many of these people calling them, many of these cosplay pagans are Wiccan refugees, or they're using a Wiccan software, even though they don't want to admit it, they absolutely are. And they seem to think that what makes someone an authentic pagan is dressing up cosplay. It's that simple. There's nothing of the sort, okay? Now, there's lots of reasons for this, okay? If there was anyone wearing those things like antlers and those kind of headdresses, they would have been shamans or proto-druids or whatever the priests were, the satyrs, okay? It wouldn't have been the ordinary people, okay? Just like we don't go, it would be equivalent of all the Christians going around dressed like the Pope, okay? Or a nun. So that's what that cosplay paganism is like. Secondly, they wouldn't have looked the way the ones look now. They owe more of their pagan aesthetic to comic book conventions and things like sci-fi conventions, fantasy wargaming conventions, than they do to how those people actually looked back then. If you saw, that's why I like the Norsemen. The Northmen, the scenes I've shot, that's what they looked like. They were very similar to how Christians were dressed in Europe at the time. Now, there is an elitism that has grown into this. And this elitism, this cosplay paganism elitism, is pushing other people out. And how it's doing it is the ones who do this have set themselves up. Oh, because I have because I'm the most cosplay LARPing pagan on the block, I have the biggest antlers. I have the most paint on my face. I look like, you know, I look like the stereotypical comic book convention version of a pagan that owes more to, say, Conan the Barbarian than actually the Icelandic, the Nordic Eddas or the Icelandic sagas or the Irish annals. Therefore, we're the real pagans. Our lifestyle is real pagan. No, you're a cosplay phony. You're dressed up. You're just a dress-up, a clown. That's all you are. While there's absolutely nothing wrong with people having fun and dressing up like that, going to see like Nordic folk metal bands and stuff like that, that's all cool. It's all great stuff. But don't be telling me that's what makes you a pagan, and more of a pagan than someone like me who goes around in a jean and t-shirts and a jacket and a jumper. Okay, that's what this. That's you not only offend. You're probably bringing curses upon you because you're actually offending your ancestors too, and you're offending ancestral priests as well. Whatever the priests were, the proto druids or whatever they were. Now, again, it's harmless if it's just a bit of fun. But when you start venerating sacred holidays or going dressed like that to stone circles and stuff like that, you're a fake, you're a phony, you're a larper. That's all you are. You're what you're doing is you're saying to other people, and this all came out of Wicca, that if you aren't as aesthetically kitted out like I am, you're not as much as a pagan as I am. Well, that's bullshit and fuck you too, okay? That's the kind of thing that will kill paganism. If it's reduced to, you don't look as cool as, or as good as dressed up or as tarted up as much as me, therefore you're not really a paganism. Shun these fuckers, because these people are damaging paganism. Paganism, like I said, if it existed today and there was no Christianity or Islamic invasion of Europe, would be dressed like the ordinary woman or chap you see walking down the street. They would have not brought attention to themselves, and that's the underlying aspect of this cosplay, LARPing paganism is narcissism. Again, that's rampant in things like Wicca and stuff like that. Rampant. You know, they all think they look like Stevie Nicks on Fleetwood Mac's 1977 tour. They don't. They look like Nora Batty from Last of the Summer Wine, a lot of them. And it's just offensive. It's offensive to me as a pagan, and it's offensive to the ancestors. And again, if you're doing it for a laugh, going to a party, going to see a band, fair enough. I mean, that's no god. But when you think that, I'm actually seeing this mentality now that we are the real pagans because we had the most cosplay. It's bollocks. It's absolute bollocks, and it's toxic. And you find these types are often quite toxic as well. They're a lot of them tend to be former Jehovah's Witnesses. It's weird how the JW thing always creeps into everything. They've just swapped one cult for another, and where the previous cult was walking around with the Jehovah Bible in their hand, the new one is now LARPing and cosplaying. And you see this, a lot of them come from, the ones in the Nordic paganism, the heathen paganism, they're former, Southern Baptist and Lutherans, and they're still walking around with the King James Bible in their hand, with that dour manner, and they still want to do church, because they want to go to buildings and do church. This is one of the things I'm really against, this concept of building pagan temples in cultures that we don't know if they had them for sure or what they look like. And it's amazing how they always seem to look like churches. Like they always look like, the local Freemasonic hall or something, or the local Methodist church. I don't know about that. And the aesthetic of our ancestors would have been expressed through their craft work. So things like, and a classic example of that would be the stave churches of Norway. They're actually pagan buildings. That's what Tara would have looked like, and the same, it would just be, the aesthetic would be taken to that level. But the individuals would be dressed like peasants you'd see anywhere in Europe at the same time, regardless of their religion or not. And they wouldn't be walking around going, I am the pagan witchy poo with my antlers on my head and my Max Factor makeup and painted face to be more pagan than you. They wouldn't be like that. Not at all. So the cosplay LARPing paganism is driving people who are not inclined to cosplay and LARPing, which is many people, most people, away from looking at paganism, because you think, I don't have the right clothes or I wouldn't look good dressed like, Conan the Barbarians or something like that. So that's the first crisis in paganism. Cosplay LARPing. The second crisis, there's really three. I'll move this to the second. The second crisis is the biblification of pagan deities. By that I mean a strict adherence to how they're portrayed in the written records, in both the Germanic, in all in our Germanic, Nordic, and Celtic paganism. What we have has been written down by Christian monks. So any adherence to that in terms of the book being a person of the pagan book is very Abrahamic. Now, it's different for Hellenic paganism, and it's definitely different for Slavic paganism, because we know that they were written down by the pagans at the time, so that's pretty accurate what they did. And look how sexy and romantic and attractive Hellenic and Roman paganism is. Well, I've got news for you. The Nordic Celtic paganism was exactly the same. The women looked elegant and beautiful, and so did the men. They dressed very tastefully. Not ostentatiously, but tastefully. Okay? And so that's another crisis, that they see it as literal. Therefore, when people are asking me about, do you really believe in the gods? And I says, this is how it is. I says, they are energy forces and they are anamorphic, zoomorphic, and archetypal representations of prevailing natural forces, both materialistic and supernatural, as well as psychological, that exist in the natural cosmic world, expressed with names and particular aesthetic and visible attributes. Okay, so Thor has a hammer because he's the thunder god, right? He bangs with a hammer, makes thunder. But they do exist. They are real gods. But when you go back to the roots, the earliest forms of them, they're very strange beings. What we imagine today is a culmination of centuries of refining the archetype to where it looks like and has like a horse with 8 legs, or the ability to guide a boat with its mind. That's all been developed later. But if you go back to the various earliest stuff you can dig on this, you were talking about Bronze Age nearly. You're looking at stuff that's very peculiar, almost like it almost seems alien to us today. Our minds have been so changed by monotheism and Abrahamism. So I always say to people, like, do you believe in Thor? And I says, oh yeah, I mean, every time there's a thunderstorm, I do salutate and venerate that. Because you look like the guy from the Marvel films. No, he doesn't. He doesn't. But a lot of people who think they're like proper paganism think they do, and they take them extremely literally, and without and then they'll go on about, oh well, I know more. I'm the real deal because I take it literally. So you take the word of Christian propaganda literally. You have to be very careful with this stuff. This is why I wrote the book, The Druid Code. You have to look at all the comparative mythological archetypes across the whole slew of paganism, and then apply to something like Hinduism, and then you're getting close to what you really should be looking at, okay, or feel, and I said, when you start looking back through Nordic and Celtic paganism, they start coming very similar, and especially when the burial rites, it gets very strange, very, very strange and peculiar. So a cosplay witchy poo pagan is as far from these people declaring themselves were the true pagans, is just utterly ridiculous, because on every level they're completely 100% wrong. And you wouldn't mind it was just harmless cosplay, but there's an element of snobbery about it. I'm better than you, and it's rooted in just narcissism and pay me attention. Look at me, look how pagan I am. And that directly comes from Wicca. And if you look at these people's so-called version of paganism, it's absolutely just a rebranded form of Wiccan. That's all it is. The cat lady paganism that the Burkean spoke about. Now, the third crisis facing paganism is political correctness. One of the things that makes paganism very appealing to intelligent people, rather than Wicca or rather than, New Age hippie stuff, is that it is aware of the dark side of creation. The pagan times were no more brutal than Christian or Islamic times, but they were more honest about it. They didn't preach, we are the religion of peace, and then cut people's heads off and stole their land. They said we are the religion of war, and that was and peace. We have both. So there's a darkness there, and that feels like the Northman seems to be finally honouring that. But even in Tolkien, you see that darkness as well. And this darkness is a vital part of being a pagan. A pagan knows that as they look at a beautiful sunset, beneath their shoes, there are creatures tearing each other asunder in a brutal war of survival. And you're caught between the beautiful sunset and the carnage, the microscopic carnage beneath your shoes. And that's where you develop real insight into what being a pagan and paganism is. Now, while there is very few neo-Nazi white nationalists who were involved in true paganism, other than sort of like, Lutheran cosplayers in America and a few other places, there's huge numbers of fucking politically correct woke types. And I won't have anything to do with them, not because they think they're bad people. I think they think they mean well, but it's because they're dishonest and they're profane to what paganism is. And they also, because they for instance, there's no reason why you should have, look, I've said it over and over again. If I went to Arizona or somewhere in America and there was a Native American powwow, okay, and they had a drum circle or a ritual dance and they asked me to join, I would say thank you, but no. I have no place in your heritage or within your spiritual legacy. It would be wrong of me to encroach upon that. Well, I take that both ways. I don't want Navajo shaman at Beltane festivals in Ushnak, or lesbian poet Navajo shamans there too. I don't want that waving rainbow flags. That's any more than I want anyone waving Nazi flags. I don't want anyone waving any flag. I nearly vomited when I saw the photographs of President Michael Higgins at the Beltane Festival in Ushnak. Politicians have no place in these unless they're genuine pagans. And he isn't. And I'll give you examples of how it's the way we have like cancel culture. It's creeping into paganism and even Irish history now. There's a well-known megalithic channel that's run by, a nice enough fella. He's a nice guy and everything, I'm sure. And he does good work here in Ireland. And he had a video saying that within Irish paganism, it welcomes refugees and immigrants. And I'm like, okay, where are we going to go with this one? And they used the example of the stranger being welcomed at Tara by Lu and, Nuada and so on. And I was like, well, they were diplomatic corps of foreign kingdoms that were being brought in for diplomatic reasons. They weren't welcoming the stranger because he was a stranger. And this is, we should open our door. It says the Irish paganism believes we open our doors to the stranger. And I'm saying, oh, okay, this is really bad, because if you look at the Book of Invasions, the Book of Invasions is about different groups coming to Ireland and either being slewn or slew the present group that was there and taken over. It couldn't be more black and white. It's about the exact opposite of welcoming the stranger. It's about like conquest and invasion. That's why it's called the Book of Invasions. And yeah, they have even say this. And it wasn't about racism or anything like that. It was about like trying to hold on to your land. And that's what happens. You see that in the Icelandic sagas as well. They were Icelanders, and they were all the same tribes, but they were all fighting each other for land, for different families. And that's just how it was. And to turn that around and say it was the complete reverse of that takes the darkness away from paganism. It takes, that brutality in paganism is as integral to the pagan philosophy, if you want to call it that, as Kali is to Hinduism. It has a place. You have to go to war sometimes. You have to do things, but it's honest. It's not like, turn the other. You're not like Christianity where turn the other cheek, love thy brother, and all this stuff, and then they all have like crusades and all this stuff. It's not like that at all. It's more honest and direct. So, if you're interested in paganism and you stumble across any one of the three issues I just spoke about, know that that's not what paganism is. That's something that's been manufactured on social media in recent times, because people can upload photographs to Instagram and TikTok videos and YouTube videos and to Facebook, showing themselves off like, look at me, I'm so paganified. That's not how it was. And one more thing that's aside to this is Wiccans. I see these things on the Wiccan groups now. The reason why witches wore black in the past is because to show that they were empaths and they absorbed the light into them. And I'm like, are you fucking retarded? Witches who could be considered as sort of like the survivors of paganism into Christian era went to extremes not to bring attention to themselves. Even Sabrina the Teenage Witch figured that one. The writers of that even figured that out. That they made themselves look as normal and as everyday and as fit in as possible. They didn't dress like Stevie Nicks or something from, Conan the Barbarian or, Warhammer's Dark Elves and stuff. They didn't do that. They didn't. So like this how stupid these people are in Wicca. But so that's an aside. But that mentality is creeping into paganism as well, because when paganism was up against it, the only way it survived was people saying, just pretend you're a Christian, just pretend you're one, and keep the old faith going. That's what happened here in Ireland. That's where witchcraft ultimately came from, was the survival of the old folk ways, the old folk traditions, the healing, the cures, the sacred wells, and they were the ones who did it, along with the ones in the Hellenic Empire who kept those great stories alive. So there you go. That's the crisis facing paganism. If you're a pagan and you see these cosplay dress-up types trying to make out that they're more pagan than you are because they're more dressed up than you are, give them a wide berth, because they're just phonies, and next year there'll be something else, or a year after there'll be something else, and these, you see, cult members are like that. That's why so many of them are either ex-JWs or recovered alcoholics. They jump. They have a lot of them have addictive personalities. They jump from one new cult to the next. So next year it might be Scientology. The year after that, or a few years after that, it might be something else. And especially the JW ones, that's wired into them to be like that. So if someone says to you, what are you? And they say, oh, I'm a pagan. You worship nature? Not really, it's more complicated than that. Why don't you look like a pagan? And you go, what does a pagan look like? And they go, well, shouldn't you be all dressed up? And you go, no, they're not pagans. They're cosplay phonies.